Hello summoners and welcome to another episode of ProGuides' Best Champions to Main, now on patch 12.8. The champs we pick for this series are strong picks with high performance but have low ban rates and are unlikely to be nerfed anytime soon. They are reliable picks for climbing and are worth investing your time in. We also have a series that covers the most broken, contested picks in each role, so be sure you're subbed to the channel so you don't miss out when we post those as well. We'll be starting things out in the top lane with Poppy. She's been bouncing up and down our tier lists lately, but she's never been bad. She usually ranges from a really strong pick to a bit above okay. Part of that is due to her being somewhat matchup dependent. Poppy is super scrappy for a tank. She doesn't have the same utility and hard engage that typically comes with champs in that class, so when she doesn't snowball hard in lane, she's kinda meh. But after the buffs she's been given on this patch, she's definitely going to be much better all around. Also, remember that you don't have to play her full tank. You can build offensively with items like Divine Sunderer and Hullbreaker being just as strong on her as on any other side laner. If you're tired of being stuck in your current elo, the first step to climbing is fixing your champion pool. That's why we make these videos, so you can find the right champ or champs for you. After you decide on what you're going to play, you then have to learn how to play it right. It can take many games to learn a new champion, but you don't have to spend days and weeks doing it alone. Our top tier coaches over on ProGuides.com can help you figure out exactly what you need to work on. They're available 24/7, so it's never a bad time to come try one out. I promise there's at least one that specializes in exactly what you're looking for. These guys have spent years reaching the top of the ladder, so why wouldn't you want to steal all their solo queue tips and tricks? Find the link to our website down in the description box below. Now, let's get back on topic, shall we? The second pick we have is Lillia, who has become really strong in the top lane after her recent buff, but still remains pretty underpicked. Now that her healing has been amped up, she's able to trade with opponents of all types, rather than strictly being a counter to tanks that gets rolled by bruisers and other carries. That said, there's a slight learning curve to Lillia. You have to learn to dip in to tag your opponents with Q, and then back out before they can land much damage on you. It's almost like a much more mechanical version of Singed. It may sound like a weird comparison, but your goal is to bait your opponent into chasing dumb trades they can't win. And speaking of Singed, he's our third top laner we'll be going over today. His unorthodox playstyle and surprisingly high damage makes Singed a champ that can still catch opponents off guard, despite him being one of the oldest champs on League's roster. There's definitely a lot of limit testing involved with learning him, so be ready to lose a couple of games in the process. To make things easier, we gave the simpler to use Conqueror page, but once you feel like you really have Singed down, you should try running Predator. That's actually his best performing rune setup. If you do use that rune page, you don't need Chem Tank and can replace it with a Rift Maker instead. Moving things into the jungle, we'll be starting off with Shyvana. For months or even years now, I've considered Shyvana one of the worst picks in the game. Her pure AP fireballs certainly pack a punch, but when you can only play around the limited window of having her ult, having just a single spell available doesn't exactly scream useful. But with this new build, you get a super tanky core that allows Shyvana to actually dive in and be useful when your dragon form is up. And since her base damage is so high and you have Demonic's percentage HP burn, you still do a ton of damage. The result is an insanely strong AP bruiser that can pretty much solo carry fights in the mid game. Our second jungle pick is Wukong. We predicted him becoming really OP after his last round of buffs, but right after those buffs hit, not much changed and we thought we jumped the gun. Well, turns out there was just a bit of a learning curve as new players picked him up. Now that people are used to him, the stats show that he's doing super well. Despite that, he's still pretty rarely picked, so he's definitely something you can get your hands on most of the time. The last jungler for this patch is Fiddlesticks. Fiddle was a disgusting pick all of last season, being one of the highest win rate junglers for pretty much the entire year. This year, he fell off just a bit when they added in the new anti-magic damage item options, but not so bad that he's unviable. He's still pretty decent, so it's kind of a shocker that he's getting a buff out of nowhere. Either way, the buff is something you can definitely take advantage of, especially if you're the type of player that prefers scaling picks that carry fights later. Now for the mid lane, the first champ we have is Anivia. Anivia is another one of these champs that is basically just always good. Seriously, look back at her stats from previous patches. Pretty much as far as you can go, she sits somewhere between the 52 and 54% win rate range. She's a super scaling pick that doesn't at all have the drawback of being weak early game. In fact, her lane phase can kind of feel unfair, with her simple QE combo easily chunking out opponents that disrespect you once you get just a bit of AP. As far as her items go, you really don't need Zhonya's as often as people build it, but if you absolutely do need the stasis, replace Shadow Flame in our build for it. The next champ we have is the newly buffed Tristana. I think this is another example of Riot trying to buff a champ in their intended role, but them just becoming super OP in another. While Tristana is just kind of average in the bot lane, a lot of higher elo players agree that she's a pretty sleeper OP mid. With more AD, she'll be just that much more snowbally once you get a lead. Speaking of snowballing, if you find you're stomping your lane opponent and the enemy team is mostly squishy champs, feel free to go Collector over Phantom Dancer as your second item. This gives you insane one-shot potential with your combo, with very few champs aside from the super beefy boys being able to survive a fully stacked E. The third mid laner we have is Velkoz. Again, he's a champ that looks like he's performing just fine, but is still getting a bit of a buff. And while the buffs may seem small, adding on 5 and a 10% scaling to his core damage spells can really add up. A lot of what makes Velkoz so strong is how unique his poke is. While other mages sort of just throw their poke out in a straight line, with Velkoz you're able to hit pop shots from weird angles and even from inside of walls, so your opponents won't always have a way to dodge it. Taking a look now at the bottom lane, the first carry we have is Twitch. With Jinx being nerfed, he's getting a bit more competitive for the title of best hyper carry in the game. He does have his drawbacks since he's short ranged and pretty immobile in lane, but that only hurts you if you play too passively. He actually does a lot of damage, and you can usually win 2v2 trades if you don't just roll over and let your foes have their way. For the build, we have the best 5v5 damage options, but if you're playing to snowball and assassinate people, go Collector second. If you'd rather just turn off your brain and play AD carry on easy mode, maybe Sivir is something you should consider. With her lethality build, you barely even interact with the game. Once you have just an item or two, you quite literally just spam Q 90% of the time, doing massive chunks of damage to your opponents while you're nowhere near being in range of any danger. Lethality builds are really all that makes some AD carries like Xayah and Sivir viable. It allows them to completely bypass their weak early games and turns them into super obnoxious, nearly untouchable poke bots in the mid to late game. And that brings us to today's question of the day. Do you think lethality builds are unhealthy for AD carries? While we generally try to keep the question of the day to a pretty broad subject, today's is a bit more specific, but I think it's a pretty good one to ponder. If the only way for an AD carry to be viable is to build items that completely alter their intended playstyle, can it really be a healthy part of the game? Personally, I'd rather see Riot buff those AD carries in a way that makes them viable as hyper carries again, but I also don't know how they'd do it. But that's just me, and we want to hear from you. So let us know your thoughts down in the comments below. Now let's get back on topic, shall we? The last bot lane carry we have is Kog'Maw. There have been many builds for him, but the one we're going with right now is the one where you start out going full DPS with Ginsu's and Hurricane into full tank. This allows you to lean on Kog's W for all of your damage, and then makes you durable enough to survive even the scariest of divers, with you easily mowing them down before they kill you. Now, to round things out with our supports, we have Bard. Bard is personally one of my favorite supports to have in the meta. He's one of the best playmakers in the role, with insane setup and counterplay potential between his portals and his ultimate. At the moment, we think the standard tanky utility build is the way to go, but this is subject to change. Since they're increasing his damage, it may also end up being good to go to the Mandate, Deadman's, and RFC combo again, which was a lot of fun. The next support we have for you is Zilean. If you're a scaling type of player, Zilean is the support for you. That said, he isn't always completely helpless in lane. His double bomb can do a good bit of damage and can easily set up an aggressive AD carry for some kills. If you're the stronger 2v2 lane, don't be afraid to max Q and play to win lane. That said, most of the time, you won't be, and you'll want to do Emax into W instead. That way, you have both of your utility spells maxed by the time it's time to teamfight. Finishing things off, we have Taliyah. Taliyah is pretty much the antithesis of Zilean. She's what you want to pick if you're the kind of player that wants to smash lane hard, either one-shotting opponents with your combo or keeping them oppressed under their tower with Q spam. Aside from her super OP laning, she also has good roams thanks to her passive, so feel free to go help out your jungler if you see any potential early skirmishes. And that is it for our top 3 champs to main on 12.8. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to sub so you never miss out on our meta guides and so you're always in the loop on what the best picks are. Remember to let us know if you think lethality AD carries are healthy for the game down in the comments below. And one last thing, don't forget to check out our Discord in the description box below, where you can discuss League further or just hang out and be part of our community. I can't wait to see you guys back for the next video, but until then, good luck on the Rift, and may the LP god smile down upon you.